Hi, I've just read a very disturbing report on LBC. Now, the incident in question is from May last year, May 2019, but I think the issues are very, very pertinent to today. They're ongoing. I'll read out the report because it's not too long, and comment a bit more about it and some of the issues around this. It really is shocking. The report's by Kate Buck on LBC. Actually includes a video, so I'll put the link in this video. In this video, this is a horrific moment. 8 police officers were doused in petrol as a crowd shouted, "Light them up!" as they tried to arrest a dangerous driver. The brave officers from Essex Police were working in Canvey Island in May 2019 when they received reports of a motorbike being driven dangerously in the area. They ended up pursuing the driver for around 8 miles, with the police helicopter also being drafted in to help with finding him. When they caught up with him on an estate in Basildon, um, but when they went to arrest him around of that's a bit of a grammatical issue. They caught up with him on an estate in Basildon, but when they went to arrest him, a crowd of around 30 people gathered. One woman threatened them with a hammer before Justin Jackson, 28, rushed forward with a watering can full of petrol. He then launched it over the officers, with two having to be taken to hospital after swallowing the toxic liquid and getting it in their eyes. As Jackson launched his attack, the crowd shouted, "Light them up!" The shocking footage serves as a reminder of the danger the men and women in the police put themselves in every day. Chief Inspector Jonathan Baldwin told BBC's Critical Incident that the officers involved feared for their lives. Not surprised. One match, one lighter, one spark could result in us going up in flames and being disfigured for life or possibly even dead, he added. PC Matthew Cutts tried to stop Jackson, fearing he could be about to seriously injure or even kill his colleagues. He said, "I could smell petrol, so I sort of fumbled around to get my baton out, but once I've got it, I've put behind my head and just struck him in line with my training." Jackson was jailed for 3 years and 9 months following the incident. A 17-year-old from Basildon was disqualified from driving for a year and fined. Right, now let's just firstly focus on the sentence there. 3 years and 9 months. 3 years and 9 months. I'd like to examine the head of the judge and what sick line of thinking they had in that sentence. Now, apologies in advance here because this is something that gets me very emotionally charged, quite honest. I'm not going to equivocate on this. It's something that frankly infuriates me. I have contempt for weak judges. I have contempt for the criminals who do this, but I have, frankly, almost as much contempt for weak judges who enable it. That should be seen as attempted murder. It really, really should. It should have been a minimum of 10 years. Now, bear in mind, these weren't even young offenders. This was a 28-year-old man. 3.5 years for attempting to set a police officer on fire. Let that sink in. Not just one officer, in fact. That would have been essentially a massacre. It's no exaggeration. Just as bad as any terrorist attack. Yet this dangerous criminal got 3.5 years, for which he'll probably be out in two. One thing, the recent murder of PC Ratam in Croydon is a shocking reminder of the state that we're in. I'm not going to talk about crime levels because I don't have that data available, so I don't know how, for example, 2020 compares to say 2010 or other years. So I'm not going to get into data exactly, but it is very, very obvious that there is a complacency among criminals to do this. Let's be clear, we have always had crime. You could go back to, the 19th century and there's some pretty bad crimes. There's always been a criminal class. There's always been people who are sociopaths. They don't care about other people and who aren't above even attacking police officers. but I am adamant that something has changed over the last few decades where criminals have got a lot more complacent. I mean, in the past, they would have been just as ruthless and just as violent, but they would have probably been a bit more cautious. Um, I believe something has changed, and I believe a big part of that is a change in our justice system. It's difficult to pinpoint the exact point when this happened, but um, I think the liberal experiment, the liberal approach has just failed because there is no deterrent. It fundamentally comes down to a problem that criminals do not fear justice. They just don't. Whereas in the past, they would have been just as violent and just as ruthless. I think they would have feared justice. For one thing, they would have feared the shadow of the noose. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating the return of the death penalty. I'm against the death penalty, and I'm not sure that that would necessarily solve our problems. However, I do think that one thing that is missing from our justice system is democracy, quite frankly. The public feel utterly disempowered. Right now, sentencing in England and Wales, and there's a sister body in Scotland and Northern Ireland, I understand. But right now, it's determined by a body called the Sentencing Council. Now, these are unelected bureaucrats. None of them are elected. They're made up of lawyers and legal people who basically determine what sentencing should be. I recently contacted them with my contentions about what I see as their inefficiency. And if you look at the website, they're very strong on self-congratulation. Have a section, for example, on the myths around sentencing, but a lot of that is evasive. It doesn't look at real-world examples, so they're not being entirely honest. And I would charge that directly at them. They're not being entirely honest. They cannot say that there are not many, many examples of disproportionate leniency. There blatantly are. I do not understand how there could be any mitigating factors for this creature getting just 3.5 years. I would say that should be an absolute minimum of 10 years. It should be seen as attempted murder. And those who egg them on should get 5 years each at least. Um, I mean, bear in mind this was police officers, and the reason I'm saying that, I'm not saying a police officer's life is worth more than anyone else. I'm of the view that murder is murder, but it's just an indicator of the complacency that they have. So I am furious with the Sentencing Council of England and Wales. When they replied to me, they said they were going through consultations and they were planning some changes. I'm not optimistic about that. I believe, frankly, just like Ofcom, they need to be disabolished. They're a useless organisation. Clearly, they don't listen to the public. They don't understand the depth of public anger. Um, so they need to be replaced by people who actually care about justice. I believe these people are ideologically liberal, the majority of them, and my basis for that is the outcome we see from their decisions. I know I'll be coming across as very conservative in this, and that's fine. Crime is one area I fully admit to being well on the conservative side of things. I believe if you terrorize society, you pay a price. What these officers went through, horrendous. But it isn't just the Sentencing Council of England and Wales, it's also weak, useless judges who are unaccountable. Now, an obvious approach to that would be to elect judges. I could see some problems with that because you might get communities, for example, there'd be certain parts of London where then the community might elect an Islamist judge. You could see obvious problems with that. So maybe not electing judges is the right answer. However, there should be far, far greater empowerment to the public, hold weak judges to account. So that is to say, if there is sufficient depth of feeling that a judgment has been too lenient, then that judge needs to face public scrutiny. and if need be suspended if they are deemed to have issued a sentence that is disproportionately lenient. Now, as it stands, individuals can write to the Attorney General, who at the moment is Suella Braverman. I've done that recently over a case that I felt was too lenient. But even then, the only recourse she can do is write to the appeals court, and there's no guarantee that they'll change the decision. So the public have to go up against a lot of bureaucracy to even get a case reviewed. This is wrong. If you ask the public how much faith do they have in the justice system, I think if you've done a vox pop on that, you would find the vast majority of people have no faith or little faith. Now, the Sentencing Council of England and Wales essentially blame the media. They say, oh, this is the perception that the public have, but it's a perception that has very good basis. Something is fundamentally rotten. What I want to see is far more democracy in the justice system. And I am not saying, by the way, and this is a very important point, I'm not saying the answer is just flog him and hang him and throw away the keys. I do believe in human rights, so I believe in due process, and I believe give them humane treatment when they're inside. I don't believe in hellhole prisons. Make them humane, give them due process. But they shouldn't be playgrounds. They shouldn't be Nordic style luxury. I certainly wouldn't replicate the Nordic model, which liberals love to triumph, even though right now Sweden is actually experiencing quite a serious crime wave. But not to go off on a tangent, focusing just on this country, there is something fundamentally rotten going on when this sort of thing can happen. Now, you might say, well, this was just a rough estate. Probably it was, but there is a complacency there. And I cannot fathom how this guy got 3.5 years. I just can't fathom it. Priti Patel talks tough, so does her party. And I appreciate that there's only so much the government can do because, we have independent judiciary and so on. But the legal establishment need to get their head out of the sand and start listening to the public. I think, they would resent being seen as elitist. They'll say, we're just ordinary people, you know, but they have contempt for public sentiment. They stubbornly ignore public sentiment. I would like to know which judge presided in this case, because as it stands, you could see a judge being named in a report, but you try to contact them in a peaceful way to express dissatisfaction, i.e., the way you would with an elected parliamentarian. If put it this way, if you are unhappy with an MP, you can vote them out of office after 4 years. You could write to them, you could even meet in their surgery. Notwithstanding, the current restrictions, but in normal circumstances, that was what you could do. With judges, there's no way to contact them. There's never a contact address. I'm not talking about their home address. I'm not talking about harassing them here. I'm talking about holding them to account as powerful people. So let's not forget, they're in a position of power. Now, when they routinely issue soft sentences, I would suggest that's an abuse of power because they have the power to issue real deterrence and they don't. These people need to be dragged into the real world. It makes my blood boil. So, frankly, as a profession, I don't think very highly of judges right now. There are some exceptions. I've come across judges who will issue decent sentences that actually match the gravity of the crime. But frankly, right now, they seem to be the minority. You know, I couldn't make a video about every case that is like this because there is simply too many. But this is a particularly bad one. Something has to change. The Tories talk tough on crime, but they've been in power now for 10 years. Not much has changed. It's very, very clear we need a greater democracy in the justice system. And I think the way to do that is by pressure. So the public need to show their anger. If you're angry about soft sentencing, these are the people to blame. Sentencing Council of England and Wales, they set the guidelines, and judges. Now, both sides will pass the buck. Judges will say, oh, our hands are tied by, the restrictions that we have. That's not entirely true because more often than not, they will issue a sentence that is actually less than the guidelines. I think we should have a minimum. I believe they do it in Australia, have a minimum line where judges have their hands tied to a minimum sentence. In other words, they cannot give this in so many years. For something like attempted murder, I think it should be an absolute minimum of 10 years. So a weak judge cannot ideologically favour a more lenient sentence. If they wanted to, they can't do it. These judges need to understand that the public are sick of it. These judges need to be forced to understand public anger. I'm talking in a peaceful way. I'm talking through peaceful dissent, but they need to face pressure. I can only do so much as an individual. I could start petitions and so on, and I probably will, but I think a lot of people are angry. They just don't know what exactly to do. They feel powerless. They feel powerless. So what the public need to understand is they need to understand where this originates. And it originates by the people who issue the sentencing guidelines, which is the Sentencing Council of England and Wales. So they need to face unprecedented public anger peacefully. Not threats, nothing like that. That would be wrong. But they need to face, as people in a position of power, they need to face accountability. And they need to understand the depth of public anger. I don't think they understand it, because if they did, they wouldn't continue to be so utterly useless. Absolutely infuriates me. So something has to change. And if you disagree with me, if you say, no, Nathan, that's too populist, that's too hardline, I would say, well, what would you suggest? If you're of a more liberal school of thought, what would you honestly suggest? Because clearly the softly, softly approach is not working. And 3.5 years for attempted murder is definitely soft. Definitely. That was a 28-year-old. If that culprit was 16, it would have been an even less of a sentence. Probably wouldn't even have been custodial. So perverse is our system. And I don't believe we have the worst system in the world, but it is a system that lacks democracy and must greatly improve. I probably will do a petition. If I do, I'll make a video specifically about it, but something has to change. Like I said, there's only so much I could do as an individual. I could write to the Home Secretary, I could write to the Attorney General. I've written to the Sentencing Council of England and Wales. They said they would take my views into consideration, but they didn't agree with my analysis. Um, I don't believe that they're going to do a damn thing. I don't trust them. I don't think they're accountable. They have, I believe it's 12 representatives, and only one of them deals with victims' issues. Only one. Makes my blood boil. But people need to know the sources. The Sentencing Council of England and Wales, they have a postal address, they have a phone number. If you feel as strongly as I do, contact them. Let them know how you feel. Judges, like I say, it's disgraceful that there's no way to hold them to account. There's no contact address. All courts should have a postal address where you can directly say, I do not believe that this judgment was fair and just and proportionate. That doesn't exist. You have to go through a lot of bureaucracy to even see the slightest chance of anything happening. Damn disgrace. And if I ever get into a position of power as a politician, I will do everything I can. And there's limited amount that an individual can do. I will do everything I can do to try and see some changes take place, because this is just wrong. It's an insult to those officers. What will happen? These thugs will just laugh it off. So I'll put a link to the story, and that's how I feel about it. Thanks for watching.